Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Cup Reviews, brought to you by Cup of Hemlock Theatre. I am your host and marketing manager here at Cup of Hemlock, Mackenzie, and I'm really excited because today we are branching out from the realms of Stratford into some other companies and some more modern works. So to do that, our first production we have chosen to spearhead this is the Theatre Smith-Gilmour 2013 production of As I Lay Dying, which is based off William Faulkner's epic novel of the same name. And to go about this review with me, we have a wonderful OG panel, as we are now dubbed. So first up, we have our production manager, Edmund Clark. Ed, how are you?
I'm doing well. Yourself, Mac?
I'm doing well. Can't really complain. I'm excited to talk all about this epic journey of a play.
Oh yeah, lots to get into today.
Right? What's in your cup today?
So I have coffee once again. Last night was a late night, so if you see some bags under my eyes or droopy eyes, it's not because I'm not interested. I'm just still waking up. So
you mean, Ed, you didn't go to the makeup tree that we had set up for you to get touched up beforehand?
Actually, I do have some makeup in my closet that I'm preparing for the Man of Destiny recording this Sunday.
Which by the time you're watching this at home will be last Sunday.
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Exactly. We're in the future. No, we're in the past.
It's practically time travel.
Yeah.
It's true. But there we go. So coffee for you. Wonderful. Next, we have our general assistant, the lady who keeps us all on track here at Cup of Hemlock, Ms. Jillian Robinson. Hello, Jill.
Hello, Mac. Thanks for having me again.
Thank you for coming on again. What's in your cup and what is your ensemble today?
My ensemble today, right. So I have some overalls, like they're shorts because it's the summer and it's really hot where I am right now. So I wanted to go with the suspender white shirt look that's on par with today's production. My earrings, it's a bit of a stretch, but they kind of remind me of the fire scene that we have. Spoiler alert. They're red and multifaceted, so we'll dig into all the goodiness of that. Then my cup again is a bit of a stretch, but my cup is on theme. My drink is just a peppermint tea. My tummy was being kind of weird, so peppermint tea is the drink, but the cup is actually a retirement cup that I can't remember if it's my dad's or my mom's, but it's black and white. So again, a lot of color pattern we're seeing in costume and the very black and white minimalist staging that's present in this piece. But also there's little elements on it, like it's a house that says home. The little inscription on the lip says, "The bonds we have are everlasting." There's a lot of irony in this mug, and there's a little message over top here. I mean, it is a retirement message, so we'll splice some of it away, but wishing you happiness as you enjoy the important things in life, ... family, friends, and the comfort of home. So I'm going to be sipping on irony throughout this entire panel.
Nice.
Very good. Very good. Ryan, our wonderful literary manager, Ryan Borochovitz, is joining us once again. This was actually his suggestion of a production for us to do, so well done, Ryan. Ryan, what is your ensemble and what is in your cup?
Yeah, so I keep trying to up the A game for the ensemble because Jill keeps making the rest of us look bad because she's always so on top of it. So I'm wearing plaid because it's the closest, like, it has nothing to do with the costumes of this production, but it is like farm Dust Bowl chic, I guess.
Yes.
And so that's the extent of effort I put into my ensemble. For my cup, well, I'm just drinking regular orange pico tea as per usual, but I have this custom printed Sad Ibsen Theater mug, which is the company that I started back in 2014, around the same time that I saw this production. It was under a different title, Take Me Back to Jefferson, when it was at Factory Theater in 2014. But because this production, as well as other things I was seeing and experiencing at the time, might have been germinating my head while I was inspired to start my own company, I felt it was appropriate to dig this up to be sipping on while talking about this and revisiting this so many years later.
I love it. And I'm drinking water once again from my silver tankard, and in honor of the overalls and white shirt costume design, I have also broken out my suspenders for this.
You brought your A game too, I can
Yes.
see.
I tried. But, so as we said, this is based off an epic novel that I have not read. I don't think Jill or Ed have read. But Ryan, as our literary manager,
Why don't you give us manager is the one who's read
it. Why don't you give us the brief plot rundown of what the heck this is? Because unlike your Shakespeare plays, which are common knowledge of kind of what these plays are, unless they're like really obscure and like King John, like for the most part, people knew what the plays were about without a plot summary. But like for this one, it may be good to kind of give us a rundown. So, Ryan, give us a rundown of what is the plot of As I Lay Dying.
Okay, yeah, so this is it's a novel written in the 1930s by William Faulkner, and it is set around this very toxic family called the Bundrens. And at the very early in the beginning of the novel, the matriarch of the family, Addie, has passed away, and the patriarch, Anse, wants to respect her last wishes to be buried in her original hometown of Jefferson, Mississippi. And so he gets the whole family together in this wagon, brings to her unbombed corpse. That becomes important later. Unembalmed, sorry. Yes, a corpse. Puts it in a coffin made by the eldest son, Cash. Put it all in the wagon, and they all go on this adventure, very dangerous journey that takes way longer than expected. But eventually they arrive in Jefferson after a lot of trials and tribulations to complete their goal.
9 days later.
9 days later, and, I don't know if you know anything about embalming, but that corpse starts to stink after a while. As does Cash's leg, which breaks along the journey. And another son, Darrell, his mind is deteriorating due under the weight of everything that's going on. The daughter, Dewey Dell, is pregnant, and her baby daddy, Leif, gave her $10 so she could seek out an abortion in Jefferson at a pharmacy, which does not go well. And then there's also the youngest son, Vardaman, who's 7 and very much has the mind of a 7-year-old, which in the book, all of these characters, as well as the various people that they meet on their journey, have chapters that they narrate. It's, for a more kind of contemporary reference, think Game of Thrones, how all the characters have their own chapters, but unlike Game of Thrones, which is a third-person narrator focalized through the perspectives of each of the characters, like what they see, but still not them speaking, this is very much a stream of consciousness journey kind of into each of their minds and the way they perceive the worlds and talk about their own experiences. So yeah, it's an interesting book to read. It really kind of just drops you in the middle of these people's lives. It doesn't hold your hand through it. That's kind of what Faulkner was known best for. His other best known novel, The Sound and the Fury, definitely did that in a kind of different but similar way. I would recommend it. I have it right here. But that's kind of the rundown on the book, but we're here to talk about this production. So
in that case, why don't we dive right in with which character do we feel was best performed? Jill, would you like to start this one?
I would love to start this one. So, me, I think hands down, even though there wasn't really a weak character in my mind per se, Benjamin Muir as Jewel just like stole the show for me. And I think it was because it actually wasn't until the end banana scene with all of the siblings that I was able to really like sink into how all of these characters sort of like represent different archetypes throughout the entire piece. And I think that last like moment of them eating the bananas, like you really got to see everyone and their role kind of sussed out in that one moment. And so kind of just taking that snapshot and sinking back into them individually, I think like Benjamin Muir as Jewel, like he just had like a perfect package of a character, and like his arc was fantastic. His physicality and connection to Lecoq's styles throughout was like absolutely stunning. Up until like his gesture, and him also as Peabody, like that was the completely opposite to me. Like they both were kind of hard cutting edged characters, but like very different gestures, very different even like levels playing. And he made them very, very different. which I've said a bunch of times, but yeah, he just really, really stood out and took the cake. Almost like a level above some of the other actors in some moments too. And I think part of that is because the energy he had to have for both of those characters that he was playing, they kind of would be standoutish anyways. But I know that like that performance would be completely exhausting for an actor too, especially that one scene where he's like playing both himself, Jewel, and the horse. Props to Benjamin Muir. He's my choice.
Mm-hmm. Love it. Wonderful. Ed, who is your choice for best performed?
I want to say before I get into it, I wish I had seen this in person. I wish I had been in the production to see it. I would say that the one I favored more was Addie Bundren. Mm-hmm. And I just think that her scene, the placement of her scene just came as a relief. There was a lot going on throughout the performance, and then having that scene of relaxation to just come on the stage, and everything is fairly still. Like her character is very still, and she's definitely speaking from an abstract space since she's dead. Spoiler alert.
It's in the title.
She's the one that's lying dead. Yeah, I would say that Addie Bundren, but I wasn't, for the most part, for most of the performance, I wasn't really gleaning from it any of the archetypes, or wasn't showing for me any of the archetypes. And I understand that they are very big movement based. It's a big movement based theater company, and the production was heavily movement based. But I think there was too much movement, which distracted from the performance, and then everyone sounded very similar. The accents were jarring for me. I mean, I'm from the South. I'm from Georgia, so hearing the accents, it was just kind of this is way too incoherent for me, especially from an audio, like from the online production. That's why I'm saying I wish I had seen it in person. I probably would have gotten a lot more out of it. But I would say that Addie Bundren is I think is the best performed. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because of the circumstances and the scenes and the placement, mainly the direction of that scene, that brings me to that answer.
Fair.
I will say we've been spoiled by Stratford's pro shots for the past several weeks. So we've been reviewing content while this is more of an archival footage of a production, which is still very nice of them to share. But yes, the sound and video quality were not up to the snuff that we become accustomed.
For sure. I don't think that is, I mean, like I said, I don't think that's the biggest issue for me, but I think it's definitely a factor.
Fair. Ryan.
Yeah, well, I have to respectfully disagree, Ed, that I kind of am more on Jill's side of I don't think there was a weak link in the cast, and I was very happy with all the performers. And that said, it was very hard to pick just one, so I am going to give it a tie for my first pick. And that's both of our Gilmours, Nina Gilmour as Dewey Dell and Dean Gilmour as Anse, because I just thought the two of them certainly were the ones who just pop and stand out from the crowd in every scene they're in, which there's obvious reasons for that. Dean Gilmour being just so much older than most of the cast. He just such a visually striking presence, like the motions in his face, even if we couldn't always get like a great close-up in this video, like you can see it from a mile away, just everything he's doing with his eyes and the posture and the demeanor, like he is really this force to be reckoned with, not necessarily a likable force, but that's, I think, a testament to his performance in this, certainly. And like, I think kudos to him being like one of the co-creators and spearheaders of this project to give himself the most unlikable role. Like maybe that there's something enjoyable in having that showy part, but I thought he kind of really nailed it, and I was very happy with what he brought to this really just kind of gross character, for lack of a better word. So yeah, I enjoyed that. And then Nina Gilmour as Dewey Dell, again, had that same way of just every scene she was in, like all attention goes to her. She really kind of, just probably aside from her mother, who's kind of dead and a non-speaking for most of the time, she's the only female presence on the stage. She kind of is often like very quiet and understated, like in the background of various brother scenes, but she's kind of always there, always observing. And then I just kind of found the way she embodied her whole seeking the abortion plot line really just is kind of heartbreaking, and she brought that pathos to it that sort of culminated in that banana scene at the end where she's the one sitting there doling out the fruit to her brothers. So yeah, hats off to both of them. Couldn't pick a favorite between them.
Fair enough. I will say for me, my shout out has to go to Daniel Roberts, who was so versatile. Where all these well, his main character was Vardaman, but he also played all of these various townfolk. But what I liked about him was just how versatile he could jump between these characters and make them all distinct. Like, we'll get more to this when we get into the weakest part of the production, but telling some of these characters apart was a real challenge and like job to do. So the fact that you could come on and go, okay, so he's being this like his main person is this 7-year-old, but he's also playing various townspeople, and they all have their own distinct walk and voice. Like, I thought that was a really well done thing for him to do, and it made following his track of the show the easiest out of all the brothers to follow, because all the other brothers looked the same, they talked the same, so it was like, don't really know who's who here. I mean, like, at least I know one of them has a broken leg, so that kind of gives me some idea of who he is. But yeah, I would definitely say Daniel Roberts gets my shout out for being distinctive enough to stand out from the crowd of men that are on the stage, and all the brothers. So
I think a lot of that was communicated just in his voice that he was putting on, especially as Vardaman, like this childish affect that really, even if like there's not as much visual diversity among the brothers, like you could always tell when that character was speaking.
Exactly.
Certainly.
Which is key, especially when you have them all dressed the same, which we'll get into more when I get into other things about the production. Ryan, why don't you kick us off with this next question, though? What was your favorite production or design element? Because you saw this one live, so you'll have a better understanding of what looked good on stage, which maybe looks a little bit different from
certainly different. But I will say that the things that, like, it's the same answer that I would have had if you asked me back in 2014 what stood out production wise. That's just the stage pictures that are created in this, and I think that might feel like a cop-out answer, but it is part of what this company does best, is creating this striking visual imagery. Like, obviously, the diving into the water scene is just kind of amazing, and the fire scene is kind of similar. And, like, it's just so simple how they create these things. It's not elaborate effects. It's really just light, sound, acting, kind of the confluence of those together create all of these beautiful images, like the water, just like the swimming motions paired with the thick blue light, and the classical music in the background that was creating the division between the underwater and the overwater. And then when we get the spotlight in the scene that Ed was talking about on Addie, in the middle of the water wall, everyone's still swimming slow motion in the background. It's so, this part of Theatre Smith-Gilmour's mandate is really kind of touching the audience's imagination. And I think so many of these scenes do it. Even just like the wagon is such like a simple setup. It's maybe like less strikingly beautiful as like the water and the fire scenes are, but just I think the way that it kept turning with like 90-degree increments each time we saw it. It started with Anse facing forward as the driver and everyone sitting behind him, and then we got the profile view, and then we got the back view at the end. Like, it's just very simple with very little. The coffin, I think, was a great kind of like just a simple board of wood that they turn sometimes horizontally, sometimes vertically. And one kind of last stage picture moment that I do want to highlight is the woman with the spade, which, like, it's such a kind of, it feels out of place when it first starts, because when they arrive in Jefferson and they're looking for someone to lend them a spade, suddenly they stop their wagon and there's just this like old-timey song playing as the light kind of shifts and they turn their perspective, and it's just like this, why is this moment so beautiful? What's even happening here? And then Anse goes and borrows the spade, and then it kind of pays off in the end, which I, having read the book, knew what was coming, but that woman becomes the new Mrs. Bundren, who immediately takes over Addie's role after she's buried and presumably forgotten, at least by Anse. So just like the way that they took these things that seem innocuous at the moment, but found ways to really like poetically highlight them, it's just really well. So like they just did, I think, a great job at evoking these images.
My answer is similar, but I had the movement.
Yeah.
Even though I do agree at times there was a little bit too much movement, I would say for the most part the movement was really well done, considering there was no set for them to work with, so you basically had to depend on movement to tell the story in a visual way. And so I think a lot of times there was some great specificity of movement, like with the horse bucking scene that we got with Jewel at the beginning, like just the way he moved his body was really impressive. Or even like the simple things like getting in and out of the wagon. Like, people underestimate how difficult to mime something as simple as that, to make it all uniform, and like you gotta hit this mark here if you're gonna be hopping in and out, to make sure like your knees all come out the same way, to make sure it doesn't look like we're just walking through a set piece. Like, that is more difficult than what people will actually ever give that credit for. So the fact that all these guys were jumping in and out of this wagon uniformly was great. And then like like the big highlights were obviously the underwater and the fire scene, with the way they did like the way they varied the tempo of the movements to illustrate certain moments. Like there was the one moment where it's the daughter's just being held back by the father as she's screaming into the red light. Like, that image just stuck with me because that was such a powerful shot that you could easily picture the barn burning and she's standing outside screaming for Jewel. So I definitely say the movement was really strong. Like that could have failed really quickly, and then you're stuck for 2 hours watching really bad movement. And trust me, I've sat through those performances, and they were like teeth pullingly bad. Like, God, like, and the fact that they did a pretty darn good job. Like at times, yeah, they went a little bit over the top. Like, especially at the beginning, where like it was a lot of movement and sawing and trying to fully comprehend what was going on with stuff. And then once you got into the story and got what was going on, the movements kind of synced up, which is when things kind of got together, which was nice. So I definitely say the movement was pretty strong on that. And Jill, I see you.
I'm going to piggyback off that too, Mac, and share a bit of the our time together as like a secret insider with Oh What a Lovely War, and how it's very hard to mime shoveling, and albeit shoveling a grave with like 10 other of your cast members that all have to be doing it at the exact same time with the exact same degree of intensity.
The amount of rehearsals we did for that,
and it's exhausting. Like, you are physically exhausted, and so like that is something like my favorite element is the physicality and the specificity of the physicality, because like even though I feel like that is an acquired taste for some viewers, like they don't necessarily understand why it's needed, or it is a specific style. Just like from a performer point of view, like it is excruciatingly difficult. Like, and it looks like they are attacking it with ease, but I will tell you, it took a lot of collaboration and focus for the individual and as the team to do that. And it was such a refreshing thing to watch this whole company operate physically as a unit, even though their characters required like certain gestures or in different moments, different levels of intensity. There wasn't a moment where I was like, oh, that person didn't hit the mark, or like, oh, that moment should have been more intense or less intense. And again, it plays into what Ryan has said. Like, this piece, I think, really allowed the audience to kind of like choose their own adventure when it comes to like, what are you taking away from these scenes? And the tact and the time and complete exhaustive effort that these actors put into their physicality as like a baseline for our minds as the viewer to kind of just like connect dots, because this production does make you think abstractly and chronologically, because there were moments too where I was like, okay, wait, what's happening here? I had to check in, but the physicality never faltered for me. Like, I was always able to kind of like sink into this moment and at least glean something from it. And then this kind of goes into like, it pairs well with kind of contrasting what Ed was saying earlier. I liked how there was stark contrast between like a lot of movement happening, and then there was those moments where it was just a spot and a character talking. And the fact that a lot of the dialogue in those moments where it was like, zoom, here's a spot and a person talking, was similar to characters, I kind of liked that quality, because it really allowed me to, like, especially this being an adaptation from a book, it allowed me to kind of sit and just like read the words off the page, right? Or like, this person is now my narrator. It's allowing me time to breathe and sit in this moment and just get some sort of background or like premonition as to what's going to happen. Or because a lot of those moments are very abstract, just kind of like sit with my own thoughts for a hot second before we're on the move again. So I kind of liked that the monologues were very uniform per character and with all the actors, like everyone kind of speaking in the same way. But again, I know that that's a very acquired taste. Like, a lot of people probably would not like that, or they would be taken out of that. So yeah, so physicality paired with the zoning in of like uniform speaking, that would be my favorite element.
Fair. Ed, what was your favorite element?
The lighting. I really did like the lighting when they were underwater. I thought that was really cool, contrasted with the burning that happened later on in the fire. Like, it wasn't anything, it wasn't too far off from the default lighting that they had of that, I guess, hot, barren sun wherever they were in the south.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was very cool. Yeah, and it was very dusty. It just seemed like they were out in the outback or boonies or something. So I did like the lighting. It was daunting, but in a good manner.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Something
Okay.
that I would actually add to the lighting that I think is even more pronounced in the video than it is live is just how dark the transitions got.
Yeah.
Because like when you're in the theater, it still gets dark, but you can kind of always see the movements and the outline there. But just because due to the kind of poor video quality, this almost became a point in its favor. It just got so dark. And then when the lights came up, everyone's exactly on their mark. And so like, wow, how did they do that?
Yeah,
like,
I really did like that moment when they were in the wagon. All of Anne's family was in the wagon, and Anne was standing off to the side within the shadows, speaking down to them, standing up while they were all seated down. I mean, I know the wagon is supposed to be something looking as if it's higher up, but the sculpture that they made together, it very much highlighted his sort of tyranny over the family.
And same to add to that, Ed, with the characters that were like faceless or like in silhouette, like a lot of the times with Dewey Dell's, for example, like going to the pharmacy, like that character was not only in the shadows and in the dark, but it was like lower than like the character that we're supposed to be focusing on. Yeah. So I agree with you. Like, even though the levels necessarily like realistically wouldn't make sense, like someone being lower than a wagon, or like in a store someone being on a different level, it was like a really good dramaturgical use of the space of like, we're just highlighting the things that you should see and still creating that like differing dynamic.
Yeah, I agree.
Wonderful. Okay, so now we get on to the weakest part of the production, and I want to start this one.
Okay.
Because I think the weakest part was the damn costumes. Like, they were so bland, and the fact that all the brothers looked the damn same, telling them apart was practically impossible. Like, could we not have done a little bit more to like identify who these characters were so you could easily spot them? Honestly, it's like, at least the dad, he wore a black shirt, so it was like, okay, he's a little bit outside the game from the other ones. The daughter, she's the only daughter, so it's easy to identify her. But you got Jewel, not Vardaman, because he's young, so you can identify him from the voice. But you got Jewel,
Darl and Cash.
Yeah, Cash and Darl. Like, they all were very similar. And at the beginning, when you're trying to figure out who's who on stage, it adds an extra hurdle for the audience to get over. And the fact that, like, on the website where they give you the link, it just says actor name performer. It doesn't actually give a character name. So you can't even go to the website to reference who they are. And then, like, you have them playing townspeople, which for the most part is then just putting on really awkward fake noses, which was like, I don't know why that was a choice and not like throw on a jacket, throw on a hat, something to like give you a little bit more than just a fake nose.
Truth be told, I like the noses. I thought that was like a fun, simple fix for like just any time that they weren't their main character. It was easy to like tell, and they often wear hats and like blazers too with those characters.
My one thing, that's what I was gonna say. It was kind of a take on like a clown nose, right?
Yeah,
but
I mean, it was very clown-ish with like the fact that you could see the string going around it. Like it was very like rude mechanical. Like that nose, but like I just really think they could have done a much better job of figuring out a way to give these brothers a bit more of their own visual voice, because we'll talk about this more when we get into the production and like the adaptation questions that we have. But like once again, making sure these characters are easily identifiable and you can follow their story is key to this story, because it's all about this family going through the plight of dragging this corpse across the Mississippi. And yet, when you can't always identify who's who, because also we're dealing with not the greatest film, like audio, like film quality, it can get really frustrating after all, because it's like, I don't fully connect with you because I can't remember who you are and what you are. And yeah. So, and it's not until they get certain characters, it's like the guy with the broken leg. It's like, okay, he's now like stuck on the ground a lot. So clearly we know a little bit more about him. But like, and then like the other guy was like, for the longest time I didn't figure out the whole horse thing till like they sold the horse. And I was like, oh, he likes the horse. Like for the most part, I was like, he's the guy that flails around trying to mount a horse. Okay, good, got him. And then we got Hannibal Lecter over here, who's like always like, yes. And then I did this, Clarice. Like,
and ironically, he's the one that arrives in an asylum at the end, so that checks out.
Exactly.
Oh
like for the most part, you like you got right. Like there are certain things like you had to do to like identify these characters, and you could have easily just done that by being like white shirt, black tie, white shirt, bow tie, white shirt, vest. Like you still gotta keep them in the white and black attire because obviously they're in funeral attire. But you could have done at least a look like this. That could have been a look to at least give them something to make it a little bit easier to track who they were. So yeah, costumes are my biggest hurdle. Where I'm like, come on, people, a little bit more effort. Like I get we're not Stratford to have like a whole warehouse of costumes to go and pick from, but like Value Village has a lot of dress shirts you can go and pick a dress shirt out of, or a piece of accessory to help solidify who they are. Mm-hmm. So yeah, costumes. Ed.
So I've got a lot to say.
Good. Go.
I totally agree with Mac on everything costume related. So that's whatever Mac said about costumes. That's my take on that as well. The next thing I would say is sound. I did not like that they were making sounds with their mouths. The vultures cawing, I thought, what is happening? Like, it sounds like a guy is in a bush cawing. The shoveling, I thought all the sounds they made with their mouths were very distracting. I thought it took away from what they were actually doing, whatever they were doing. Then the other thing was the voice. And I already said that accents played a factor, but I don't think that's the only factor. I think a lot of them screamed their lines, which was very incoherent for me as well. Like Jewel screaming "goddamn" every scene that he was in, or at least every scene that he was in. I thought that is a memorable quote at the end of the production for me. God damn you. God damn you. I was like, how many different ways can you scream it? But also from the dad as well. And then from the dad I couldn't understand. The brother Daryl, the one who loses his mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Darryl. Yep.
Darryl.
Yeah, so another big thing was for the ones who weren't screaming their lines, for the ones who were speaking like Dewey and Darryl and Barden, or the youngest boy. Vardaman, yeah. The youngest boy. There was no differentiation in their speech. Everything sounded like one big thought. And when clearly there's so much more that they're saying within these lines, if it just sounds like one big thought, everything, all the ideas, whatever other thoughts are coming in are going to leak and feel like they're not being said. So at times, even if I could understand the words they were saying, I didn't know what they were getting at. And that was the biggest thing in terms of voice. The other thing, and I think this is the biggest one, was the movement for me. They study in Lecoq is what it is. So albeit I know nothing of Lecoq. but
you know enough to know you don't like it.
Well, at the Academy, we do study Commedia dell'arte, the forms, the archetypes in that. We study John Meyerhold's biomechanics.
John
study. Did I say it right?
Visible.
Biomechanics. You study biomechanics. Oh man, I butchered the name.
It's okay. He's dead. He won't mind.
Yeah, he won't mind. Anyway, we study biomechanics. We have we do learn clown, like some clown movements as well. We had a professional clown from Slava Snow Show come and do a workshop with us. Mm-hmm. So just giving some insight, whatever, I guess, useless insight I have into movement. I thought, in contrast to what Jill had said earlier about the movement being effortless, I thought it was the opposite. I thought it was exhausting. It looked exhausting to me. Everything seemed very sporadic, seemed very overdone. And maybe that's a style thing. Maybe that's stylistic, and I'm just not understanding.
That could be Lecoq for all we know.
I'll give it that. Right. But it didn't look clean. It didn't look smooth. There wasn't the precision the precision wasn't always consistent. So, for example, when they're holding the coffin up and they're walking in unison, one is walking at a different rhythmic pace as opposed to the other one, and that was very much supposed to be a synchronized movement towards. But you have one person who's stumbling, the other person who's moving at a different stride, and the other person who's moving at a shorter stride than the second person. So it's like it's not matching up well, and jumping in and out of the wagon, keeping the hand still so it doesn't come down whenever you go over, is like you said, it's very difficult. It's very hard, especially movement-based pieces. Like those are very difficult. So I don't fault it, but it wasn't always precise in my viewing of it. And then to add to the costuming, I don't think that the costumes were all that to blame for distinguishing the characters. They very, very little were forms implemented into the characters. For instance, like Anse, he had his shoulders hunched. Whenever you saw him from a distance, you could tell, okay, that's the dad, right? And so like a form like that, he played through consistently. But when everybody else, aside from like the doctor, who was clearly always hunched back, like had his suitcases always ready to go, like aside from those two figures within the piece, everyone else was either standing straight up, squared feet, paralleled shoulders, very motionless or stagnant, which was odd for such a heavy movement piece whenever they were still. And then, or they would fluctuate between that or like just like small little shoulder slump. And if everybody else is doing that, then there's really no distinction. So I don't know what kind of forms they could have taken on. It's just there were no forms to really make a distinction between them anyway. So that is my piece on the weakest part of the production.
I can piggyback just briefly off of that, Mac, because it kind of goes to talking about like inconsistencies. So the weakest thing for me was like the pace, and more so talking about like the beginning of the piece. Like I feel like if I would have read the novel beforehand, I would be on board and I would be able to kind of like strip that aside. But it took me like a really long time to like get in on the story and like get into the nitty gritty of like who these people are and like what they're doing, because this whole setup of building the coffin to me was like a little bit exhaustive. It was like, hey, we get it. You're building a coffin. Your mother is ill. Like, we're understanding it. I don't think I need this for like 40 minutes. And again, like, I guess to be devil's advocate to my own disliking, it could have been like establishing for the audience, like, this is the technique we're using. We're kind of like getting you in on like, this is how the story is going to be told through using gesture, through lack of set, but it's like, I don't
need 40 minutes for that.
I don't need that. You know what I mean? Like, I don't need you to hold my hand with that. Like, just throw it at me. Like, I would prefer that versus like the saw going back and forth one more time. You know, it's just like, I got to a point where finally it wasn't until they actually started to go on the journey, like when that wagon became built, I was like, okay, we're ready. The play is starting. Like, and so I think I needed like a quickened pace up until that moment. Which again is kind of sad because part of it might have been they wanted to like establish that like, this is the way we're doing the piece. This is the way that like physically you will be seeing these images and what have you. And I do think there are some very striking, emotional and physical access that you can get through like Lecoq style and the production that we saw is like a good example of that, little vignettes that's possible. But so it's sad to think though that like it took that much time to like tell the audience that like this is the style that is obviously not well known or well executed.
So I didn't have nearly as much as the rest of you. Like, truth be told, I have a special soft spot for this production, the book that it's based on, especially having, more than anything, having seen the production way back when. And this is just kind of my jam, basically. So even though I recognize that a lot is lost in the translation of filming it, at least the way it was filmed here, I fortunately have 2 frames of reference for kind of falling back on, which I understand.
You've also read the book.
Yeah, that's one of those 2 frames of reference. So I know the characters and know like what's happening kind of at various stages, and I can remember seeing it live the first time. And especially since that was a very positive theater experience that did stick with me, naturally there will be that nostalgia factor.
I do stand by it. I wish I could have seen this live.
Yeah. Well, I hope they bring it back after COVID and like after we can see theater again, because this is like a widely touring production that has had multiple revivals at various times in Toronto and elsewhere. Yeah. So like I said, like when I saw it at Factory, that was a year after this was filmed at Pass Mariah, and they gave it a completely different title, Take Me Back to Jefferson. So like this is also a work in progress kind of that could be like tinkered with. So maybe if they're listening to like some of this
beginning.
Well, there's a lot they'll have to do. I'm doing a 2020 production in this. Yeah. We'll get to that later though. But.
Okay. Well, so just going back to like, so in terms of my kind of like shorter list of like weakest elements, I don't think there's anything that I have that wasn't already brought up by one of you. I agree that the visual diversity of at least the brothers could have been done there. And like, honestly, though, I don't really feel like that was majorly a costuming kind of issue, though, because, like, yes, while they are wearing similar clothes, there was, like, something costume-wise that did distinguish all of them. Like, Darrell was always, like, buttoned up, and to comment on your point, Ed, he had that form. Like, I never had a hard time picking him out.
Yeah.
And the only 2 that I often kind of struggled between was Jewel and Cash. And then once Cash broke his leg, that was resolved by the end, and Jewel was always the one on the horse. So whenever it was
break his leg earlier.
Yeah.
All in all, there was a lot of times that I was like, what white man, brown-haired person is this now?
Well, and that's, I kind of think, and like, I don't know at what stage in the development the casting happened, because this is like a collective creation piece. I don't know if these are just all company members who came together and let's do this show, or if there was auditions, but I really think more visual diversity doesn't even necessarily have to be racial diversity, although that wouldn't hurt as well, but just different like shapes and sizes and ages of like, we have
hair color. That was the main thing between like Cash and Jewel. I was like, hey, these actors, they look similar, and they because like Cash was the one kind of being rigorous building the casket, and then that rigor sort of switched to Jewel with like the taming of the horse and being the savior of the fire thing. I was like, wait, what brother is what? Like,
you know, they certainly looked like brothers, and I'll use that as a defense for their casting. It's like I'm thinking that they were looking for people who look similar, that if they were outreaching, which is fine. Yeah.
Which like, I can get behind that, but I think like casting in the 21st century doesn't demand that the same way that it maybe used to. This is all just a long way of saying that I think the fact that the brothers were all these like 4 white guys of similar age and build could have something could have been done casting wise that maybe if casting was up for grabs kind of in this. I do agree that if it wasn't, then maybe something with costumes would have been a second bet, but I also sort of like the uniformity of the costumes as this point of cohesion in a way. And I don't want to fault the costumes too hard, because I think the noses and the hats and the blazers for the side characters was lovely, and that's all part of the costuming, so I don't want to ding costuming no good as
you know what I think would have been a good guide if that scene, and this, like I said, credit where credit's due, that scene where they're all in the wagon, the dad is sitting hunched over in the center, Cash or Jewel is standing in the back looking down at all, I think it's Jewel that's looking down at all the family, and then they're all just kind of together while I think it's the doctor that's speaking to them from outside, or someone is speaking to them.
Or it's Samson or one of the townspeople.
Yeah. But when they're all in that portrait, their family portrait, I think if they had taken a picture of that and then given it to the performers and said, maintain this form, this structure throughout the entire performance, because I thought that picture that they painted was exactly the archetypes that they were. I thought that was a picturesque visual of who they are as people. Yeah. And I could understand just from looking at it, their dispositions and their I guess their trials. So.
Yeah. The only other point I kind of had, and again, it's one that was sort of brought up already, so we don't need to belabor it, but yeah, it's just the accents and the articulation. And that's the key word being articulation more so than accent, because and again, the sound quality did not help here. I found it a lot easier to follow, but not that much easier the first time around in the theater. But yeah, if they were articulating the key words and it was easier to always grasp exactly what was being said, the accents wouldn't seem so I don't even want to say bad, just seems so disruptive. But yeah, there was a lot of just jumbled kind of talking. That is part of the characterization, that they all just talk quickly, and trust me, when you read those first few chapters in the book, if we're talking about the pace, it does take a little while to sink into what exactly is happening. And if anyone also read The Sound and the Fury, that is broken up into 4 different perspectives that we get one at a time, and the first one is by someone who is neuroatypical, and that really kind of, you read the beginning of the book what even is happening, and then you need the other perspectives to kind of ground you, and okay, now we can sort of piece together, and that is kind of just Faulkner's thing. So I think it is, and we'll get to adaptation aspects in a moment, but I think the pacing certainly could have been tightened, and we maybe did need 40 minutes of sawing, but there are long chapters of just Cash going on about his design of the coffin and all the thought he's putting into it, and I think their way of trying to effectively translate that was, well, let's just watch him sawing for a long time. For sure. That's not to excuse it. Part of adaptation is that you need to decide what we can cut, for no pun intended, but yeah, and I think some of that stuff could have been tightened, but I do see it as coming about out of fidelity more so than anything.
Fair. Okay. Well, I think we belabored this talking point long enough.
I had a lot to say.
Absolutely. Jill, why don't you start us off with, do you think this production hit the mark? Is it worth the watching?
So, okay. I think it's worth the watching. I think just by judging the conversation that we've had, maybe it didn't hit the mark. I think from a stylistic point of view, it does, just because it again is giving it's bringing Lecoq to the forefront. It is hitting home their mandate portion of deriving the story from the body versus text, which I think is very important for artists to watch. And even if it wasn't executed perfectly, I think an element of acting that at least I know myself and other actors come to this roadblock a lot too, is that you can rely on your body and gestures to help work out the text and moments of a piece for you. It doesn't necessarily need to be the highlight like this production was, but I think, and just knowing my performances in the past when I have been bogged down by a certain passage or like not knowing how to figure out this character, I know that turning to gesture and just doing some exercises in gesture for that specific character, and whether that be as extreme as some of the moments we've seen in this production, or just like a little tick or a little habit to physicalize, really does help you access the text just by doing like an exercise in physicality. Just as a performer, that's been an experience for me. I know when I was in Top Girls in my fourth year production at theater school, I had to play Angie and Isabella Bird. So Angie is like a 9-year-old, lot of energy, and then contrasted to Isabella Bird, who is like a 70-year-old, bogged down in some moments, but like ferocious. There was just like a lot to do. I needed to turn to gesture. I needed to turn to physicality. Otherwise, those characters would have been either one and the same or just not hitting the mark. Or so I think this production is an example of like almost like the excess of physicality, even though it was distracting to this particular production. It's to encourage like viewers or encourage actors to be like, hey, you can derive something from gesture. And I did like the fact that I do agree with Ed. There was times that I'm like, okay, now I'm really stretching my imagination to like kind of get what I'm supposed to be getting. But I did like the fact that like, I feel like this is one of those pieces that you can talk about for such a long time, because like every audience member is going to walk away with a differing perspective. And whether that be residing in a production element or like in the way that like a tableau was hit, or in the way that like a physicality was hit, in the way that like a speech was said. I do like performances that like you walk away from and you can talk a lot about it on different levels. So from a dramaturgical and imagination stimulating perspective, yes. Overall, I think I to be honest, like I don't know if it hit the mark, because it's unlike something where we've had this question before with Shakespeare's, that we've probably seen more than one Macker, so we can say if this one in comparison to something hit the mark. Whereas with this kind of just aside from the novel, theatrically it resides as its own thing. So I would maybe like to see it performed again with changes, and then I'd be able to fully say if it hit the mark or not. But yeah.
Ryan?
Well, I think you probably know what my answer is. It hit the mark for me. I don't want to like now, and I'm sorry being the one who chose this production. If some of you enjoyed it a lot less than I did, I'm sorry if I necessarily like put you all through this.
Apologize.
No, that's what it is.
No, art is art. We should like watching all types of art is good no matter what.
But yeah, truth be told, I picked this because I remembered enjoying it so well and was so excited when I saw that they put the streaming online, and I've been wanting to watch the stream because they put it up in May. I've been wanting to watch this whole time, but because we've been doing a Shakespeare play from Stratford every week, I just haven't found the time to watch this. I'm like, can we just do this selfishly? So since we're done with Stratford for the time being anyway, can this be the next thing we do just so I can set aside time to watch this? But yes, I in terms of the second half of this question, like, would you recommend it? I would 100% recommend anyone go see it in the theater next time it comes up. I would be slightly less quick to suggest someone subscribe to the stream and watch the link, just because, yeah, I did find more so the audio than the video, but yes, the sound quality was very distracting at times and did not help the articulation issue that I was talking about a moment ago. But as I said prior to that, since the big production element for me that is, and I think we all are kind of in agreement of this, that the reason to see the show kind of is these visual stage pictures that they created. Of course, they're more potent in the theater, but I don't feel like that was lost in translation from stage to screen here. So I would 100% say watch it just for those, even if you have a hard time following the dialogue and following the plot, because this is a bit of at least certain moments can be seen as a masterclass in that type of visual imagery, in my humble opinion.
No.
Oh.
Let me finish. No, I much rather read the book and then come back to watch the production live.
Mhm.
Like I would definitely give this a second chance and going to see it live. But for me, as it stands right now, I don't think it hit the mark.
Fair. I'll say I'm on the fence like Jill. Like for me, I go any type of theater you watch, whether it be live, on stage, or via computer screen. You can always get something out of it. You can always glean. It's just like watching a bad movie. Should we all watch Tommy Wiseau's The Room because it's an Oscar-winning masterpiece? No, but you definitely can glean something out of it. Like I know Ed, it's one of your favorite movies.
For sure.
So I mean, like right there, like that's what's great about art is that art is a subjective form where we can all glean something. Like I learned from watching that costuming and making sure your characters are really distinct can really help tell a story. It makes me appreciate even more like shows, like big shows like that, like a Les Miserables, where you have this plethora of characters, but yet somehow they've still made it so you can follow all these distinct characters along their journey. Just makes you go, okay, what do I have to do if I'm going to be telling a story, either as a director or as a performer, to make sure that my audience can quickly snap into who these characters are, so I don't have to get bogged down in 40 minutes of sawing where I'm trying to set my world up. Like there are lessons you can take away from this. So would I say it hits the mark every time? No, I think there's some good visual images that you can glean from. I thought some of the acting was really well done. I definitely can see Stratford doing a production of this. Like I would love to see it with Tom McManus playing the father and like Sean McKenna as the mother. I think that'd be a great bit of theater. I don't think you'd have to do all the movement with this. I think you could just take the script and just do it a Stratford way with like an actual cart and coffin. Because like they did do The Grapes of Wrath, which was a okay production. That also starred Tom McManus, funny enough, as the priest, or ex-priest. But either way, point being that I do think there is some valid elements in this production that I think you can glean and learn something from, even if overall we were like, yeah, it didn't quite hit the mark. I like Ed. I would definitely give this a chance seeing it live just to see what new things I could take away. And now that I know the story a little bit better, I would definitely just want us to watch that beginning again, just because now that I kind of know where we're driving to, I'm sure that will help clarify that beginning 40 minutes of sawing.
And I know that I've been the antagonist of the piece, but credit where credit is due. Like I do commend them for the visuals that they were striving for, and at times they did hit the mark with some of their visuals. Like this piece isn't without its gems. Yeah. And I don't think this is anything. I don't think just because I don't think it hits the mark, I don't think that defines any of the actors as being bad or any of the company itself being bad. Just from my seeing of the production, this is just what I got out of my first
watch.
I
keep saying it very much is an acquired taste. Like whether you like it or not, like you have to know that like this piece of theater is one of those, like it's a thinker, it's an abstractor, and like all theater that resides in that way, people are going to love it, people are going to hate it. Like that's just how that works, right? So
some people like going to art museums and looking at squares.
One last thing I kind of just want to add on this for those watching who are on the fence if they're going to bother to subscribe to the stream and watch the actual performance. We've been using the phrase 40 minutes of sawing a lot, and that kind of misrepresents the first 40 minutes of the show because while there is a lot of sawing in those 40 minutes, and I think we all kind of locked in the idea that it's 40 minutes of sawing precisely because Cash, the one doing the sawing, does not speak his first line until 40 minutes into the production. There is other stuff that happens. It's not just
the mother is dying.
I just said that as like a funny
I know. I agree. It's a funny like idiom here, but for those who are on the fence, don't actually think that was literal because
there's plot going around the sawing, but there's a lot of freaking sawing in the first.
There is a lot of sawing. Just
we're all drama goers. We exaggerate.
Just don't think that it's 40 minutes of literally watching paint dry until suddenly they get into the wagon.
It's not some Beckett interpretation of a man is sawing at a desk or like
Don't even get me started on Beckett. Okay.
I also like Beckett. Speaking of acquired taste,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
maybe
Beckett's a
take
freaking
that as a
acquired
grain of
taste
salt
for
for my enthusiasm for this production.
Yeah, I like Tommy
True.
Wiseau's The Room. I love it.
See, and that here we go, just really quickly, like that just is so funny, Ed, that you're like the people who probably eat this production up
Right.
hate The Room.
The
So it's
Room.
just like it just goes to say like subjectivity is real.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's the joy of art.
Yeah.
Okay. So now let's dive into some more play-based questions. Now that we've kind of harped on the actual production long enough. But our first question is, does this play hold up as an adaptation of Faulkner's novel? Or for those who have not read the novel, which is a majority of this panel, after seeing this production, would you like to read the novel? Ed?
Yeah,
You're
like I
giving-
said, I'd like to read it. I mean, I would like to read it now to get to know the story. It sounds like an Odyssey in the South, so it sounds like it would be fun. Yes, this production makes me want to read the book.
Yeah. Jill?
Yeah, so I haven't read the novel, and I'm in the same realm as Ed. Like, these characters were very enticing and interesting to me. I would like to. I also like reading a lot of literature from the 1930s, and the 20s too, but more so the 30s. I just find it really interesting and complex, and
Oh yes, old sport.
like history might be repeating itself with the same sort of themes that presented to the world and economies in the 30s. So. Blow the dust off of the Dust Bowl books, everyone. But I would kind of like to see, just like you were saying, Mac, like not necessarily Stratford in particular, but like seeing like a realist or like naturalistic approach to this text versus it being using a certain style to exude the story. That would be interesting as well. So I think like, yeah, after reading the novel, my director or dramaturgical brain might go a little bit more wild of like, what would this look like in a different style and a different genre, and albeit maybe even a different era. Like, yeah, so I would like to visit the novel.
Yeah. Ryan, you can go. And then
Do you want to go first, Mac, and finish
Actually,
off
yeah, no,
the
yeah.
do I
Yeah,
want to
what
read
you're
it portion before I get
Yeah.
into does it work as an adaptation?
Right. Okay, so like I wouldn't mind reading the book just so I could understand the characters better, because I don't feel we got a full picture of who these characters were reading watching the show. Like they all came across very especially the brothers, very one-dimensional tracks. Like once again, we have to have certain like physical traits like breaking a leg to distinguish who they were. But I'm sure Ryan, I'm sure you can probably back this up having read the book. But if you read those chapters of the book from these characters' perspectives, you do get a better idea of who these characters are.
And
In
their
more-
voices are much more
Exactly,
distinguished.
the individualized voices of who these characters are that I think missed in this production. Hence why I think reading the book would just help solidify differentiating like a Jewel from a Cash from a Durrell. Like all those types of things. And I yeah, because I mean like reading the plot summary and then watching this, I was like, okay, so they hit all the major marks: flood, fire, sell the donkey, sell the horse, abortion. Like they hit all the plot points from what I can tell. So it's not like I missed like a Harry Potter where they cut a whole subplot that like is just no longer present. It's like here at least, okay, we did get the plot. It's just the character work. I think the book could help bring that a little bit more up to task, because I found a lot of the monologues, they all came across in the same voice, whether it was a Cash, a Jewel, or a Durrell. Like they all kind of spoke the same way, like there was no character way of speak. One of the things I've been learning in my screenwriting class is when you're writing a screenplay or a script, right? I'm sure as a writer you can talk to this too, but like each character should have their own distinct way of speaking, and which means as a writer you have to write in that particular voice. So like the way Jill speaks in her vocabulary is different from the way I speak. So if we were writing a script with us as characters, we would have very different types of lines to say, that because we just have different upbringings, different dialogue that we would have. But here it all just felt wide brush wash of dialogue, especially when it got to the monologues, where it was like, now I'm going to narrate a section of the book for you. And here's what we did. it was like, okay, clearly we didn't want to do this part of the movie. We just did this one in Spotlight to move this plot along a little bit. Like, there are certain things that were described. I was like, we couldn't have like had like a dialogue, like just back and forth conversation. Like we had to do this like through a monologue mode. I don't know, but like overall, I just think
just to add on to that and to what Ryan had explained in the very beginning, that this was written from a first person,
multiple first person,
multiple first person.
Yeah,
I do like that they did the the individual monologues. Like
I do too. I just think they used. I think that became a crutch a lot of times. Like where like after a while it was like, and now it's time for a monologue. Gotcha. It was like I think I could have been a little bit more varied between. Like there's not a lot of scenes where it's two characters just talking to each other. It's like movement with narration, or just spotlight monologue, or just straight up movement.
Yeah.
Like there wasn't any like it's hard to like the scenes that really stuck out to me were like the $10 scene where the dad takes the $10 from the daughter, because it's an actual like conversation between two people.
Which is, I will add, just on that point, it's one of the more dialogue heavy chapters in the book itself.
Yeah.
So like that's
bring the book up.
Yeah, I have it handy. I'll get to it in a minute. Why? But like,
but yeah, like that's a scene that stuck out to me because it's like, oh, character interaction that actually like. Same thing with the coffin carrying scene, where like Jewel and I think it's Jewel and Daryl that are carrying the coffin, right, into the barn. Yeah. So like even that scene, like even though I can't remember exactly what happened, other than God damn it, Jewel, like that, and like but like the fact they were kind of ribbing each other. It's like, okay, we're getting some character work here. Like I just think overall read the book just so you can understand the characters a little bit better, because I think that would help develop this production a bit more if we were to mount it again and tinker with the script a bit to help make that a little bit more character driven, a little bit less adapting a book driven. Ryan, now as the one person on the panel who's actually read the book, as our resident TA,
so something I will
give us a lesson.
Something
letter of cigarettes.
Something I will add is I read the book a long time ago. I had read it prior to seeing this in theater in 2014. I don't remember how much time elapsed between the two of those, but like the book certainly wasn't fresh in my memory like going into this. That said, so I've mentioned on many of our Shakespeare panels that I always have my complete works of Shakespeare open in front of me, not to necessarily read along, but to follow along in. That's kind of my way of clocking wherever dramaturgical changes have been made, because I think that is part of the discussion, certainly with contemporary Shakespeare performance. I did not intend to do the same with this, because it's an adaptation. It's not unlike a Shakespeare script that is, this is the text we're using. I'm like, there's going to be no way I can follow along in the book. Yeah. So I did have the book close by because I was referencing it while I was writing these very questions that we're answering right now. But I did not intend to flip through. Halfway through the performance, I wanted to check something in the book. This was precisely at the moment when we have Addie's monologue in the water, because I knew that would be a part that'd be very easy for me to find in the book, because Addie only has one chapter of her monologuing to us. So I just wanted to see, okay, it's interesting the abstract way they're doing this monologue, how much of that is pulled from precisely verbatim from the text. So I just paused, I pulled up the Addie chapter, and I was able to follow along very easily. And then from that moment on, about halfway through the performance, I just continued following along. And you know what? This is an incredibly faithful rendering of the book onto the stage, which I kind of already knew it was faithful just from the spirit of the text. Feels like it's been translated well. But having the book in front of me, it really actually gave me an appreciation for just, I don't know how the actual drafting or writing or dramaturging of this piece went, but I think it's very clear that everybody went into the first day of rehearsal with the book in hand, and every piece of dialogue seems to have been extracted, and then any additional dialogue was added as filler. And those parts that you were complaining about, Mac, where it is the spotlight on individuals, those are the ways that we communicate this split perspective. Mm-hmm. And so just on a pure level of fidelity, I think this production as an adaptation does a great job. Now, we've talked a moment ago about how the pacing could have maybe been tightened, so maybe that's a fault of some of this fidelity to let it draw out the same way it feels like it draws out in the book. That said, something else that I want to point out that also gives me an appreciation for this piece as adaptation is 2013, when this first saw stages, and I believe when the version we watched was filmed. There was another adaptation of this same novel that came out that year. James Franco made his film adaptation that same year, which he wrote, directed, and played Darl in. It was not good. It was not, I'm not going to mince words, it was not very good. But that adaptation is so frequently cited as an example of Franco's hubris at thinking himself talented enough as an auteur that he could tackle this presumably unfilmable novel.
I think I saw the trailer for that.
Yeah, it was a thing in 2013. It's no fault if anyone didn't see it or doesn't remember it. But, and that's the thing, like that was a big part of the reviews and discussions of that film, was just like, this novel is unfilmable by its very design. And Franco, who by that point didn't have a lot of films under his belt, as this just like, you know, eternal art school, like film school nerd, kind of like the hubris of him, the audacity of thinking that he can be the one to bring it justice was a big part of like the collective critics dunking on Franco because the film wasn't good, granted, but maybe they were a little harsh in a lot of that stuff. But that said, I think the reasons why people think this is an unfilmable novel are precisely the same reasons why I think it works well in theater, and what this production really teased out very well. Because where Franco did gimmicky film tricks like split screens to show the multiple perspectives, like, yeah, it's obvious gimmicky, like, ooh, it's multiple perspectives, therefore I'll put both on screen at once. And like, it's like very much surface level interpretation of how to like shepherd this onto the screen. But like, I feel like you could watch this staging without even realizing that the book is written into these multiple.
I didn't realize it till I did my research afterwards that the book is first person, multiple chapters. Like, it's not one protagonist, like a single main character protagonist plot, but like each character gets their own moment.
Yeah, and like, because while the book certainly, like the fact that each chapter starts with the name of the character who's narrating it, like the book certainly doesn't try to hide those themes, but I think this production completely kept those multiple perspectives without making a big show of this is what we're doing, which I very much respect. Like, those monologues are the perfect example, but it didn't become like this clumsy, jumbled mess of how are we going to display polyvocal narration? Because no, in theater you can just do that, have the character's spotlight turn to the audience and give their narration. Like, it's something that I kind of to myself refer to as the Salieri principle, if I can dig into my own sort of personal dramaturgy toolkit. But one of my like easily top 10 favorite plays is Amadeus. And like, I love the play, I love the film version, I loved the NT Live production that was not too long ago. And what I think is so interesting, and as treating Amadeus as this case study for adapting theater into film, is that maybe this is changing nowadays, but certainly when the movie came out, this wasn't the case, is theater has the freedom to break the fourth wall the way that film doesn't feel like it can, or it has to do like a big whimsical Deadpool jokey thing anytime it tries. Or so whereas the Salieri principle is that on the stage you could just easily have this character be the extra diegetic narrator and speak to the audience about the story. In the film, we need the framing device of he is giving his confession to the priest. It has to be this mimetically sealed dialogue. And with that in mind, I think this production that we just watched is a good example of how theater can get away with that the way that film doesn't feel like it can. What makes this book unfilmable is precisely the reason why it works so well in theater. And just one last point, Mac, because you frequently framed the previous question on the did it hit the mark on would I as a TA show this to my students, which I saved that version of the answer for now. I would certainly, because I love this production so much, I would show it to like theater directing, any kind of like students for that. But more than anything, I would show this production to American literature students who are studying this novel in the literary context. Maybe to like open their eyes to how theater can be a vehicle for these works, more so than I would show the Franco movie as like okay, watch this piece in adaptation. But I do think that just as a faithful adaptation of the spirit of the novel, the structure of the novel, the dramaturgy of the novel, this checks all the boxes, and I think people who like the book and are studying it in that formal context would appreciate watching this. So I encourage you all to read the book and then revisit this.
I have a tiny tangent question, Mac, to ask Brian, if I am allowed to do so.
All right.
He has experience with the novel. Why do you think? Now, maybe it's just because this theater company operates this way, but that sort of using like Lecoq's style is the vein that they went with to tell this story on stage.
If I had to guess, I would say it's a bit of a cart before the horse, that this is a Lecoq-focused company, and this is what they decided the story they wanted to tell, more so than this is a story that needs to be told a la Lecoq.
Right.
To keep up the Francophilia in this.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I can't necessarily think of, aside from just the fact that it is certainly conducive to these visual images that we all enjoyed in this, and like the things like the horse and the sawing and like all of these elements that really do become vehicles for showing off that physical technique, I think. But like I can't precisely pin down anything about this book in particular that I would think, because like you can find any interesting book that provides that stuff. I think they just, something about, I don't know who on the team necessarily pitched it, but something about this book was just like important to them and touched them, and they felt that, you know, we could do this interesting visualization of it. And going back to my previous point about how theater can do this book justice much better than film can, I think this production certainly is testament to that. So granted, this would have been in development before the Franco film came out, since they were pretty concurrent with each other. So it's not like, oh yeah, Franco, watch us theater artists do it better than you can with your fancy cameras, which we have none of, clearly. But yeah, that's my 2 cents on that. I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, and there might be, if anyone from Theatre Smith-Gilmour wants to go in the comments and explain the actual impetus, we would all appreciate that, I'm sure.
Yeah, that just came up to me because as like dramaturgically, I think like you were saying, it's very much like the company's derived from there, and the story does work in this vehicle. It's just like now knowing I can revisit the novel too, and I just have like a spark in the back of my brain of like, what would this production look like if it was done like a Grapes of Wrath or like a Mice and Men on stage, you know? And
if I could comment on that, because I think Steinbeck and Faulkner, although they're often kind of said in the same breath of these like Southern authors at the same time, dramaturgically, I think they are very different from each other. And Grapes of Wrath, like Steinbeck was actually like a novelist dramaturg kind of way, not so much with Grapes of Wrath, but like Of Mice and Men, for example, that is a novella that was written to also be a play. It's the play novelette was kind of one of Steinbeck's kind of trademark things, where he's like, I prefer writing novels than writing scripts. But if you extract all the dialogue from this novel, you will have a serviceable script for a play. So if you've ever seen a stage version of Mice and Men, that's not some playwright having to tinker away at an adaptation. That is them just extracting the dialogue from Of Mice and Men directly.
Right.
And I think Steinbeck having that type of dramaturgical brain makes something like The Grapes of Wrath or East of Eden like easier to kind of put into that format than something like this that is written wholesale to be a novel and needs this kind of like creative theatricalizing with like the movement to
even just the because I've not had the privilege of reading any of Faulkner's work, but like the way that you described him as being kind of like with both his novels, like he's placing you like in these people's lives without really any backstory. There is something jarring to that, you know, where like something like seeing this story in a very jarring style can sort of mimic that flavor that Faulkner has in his writing. versus Steinbeck's more like beginning, middle, end vibe feel, you know, like that. I guess that would be a way to maybe justify choosing this bit more of a jarring style to create the text on stage.
And like, keep in mind, this book, I'll put it on screen again just because we've talked about a few books now. This book is capital M modernism, and it is like pushing to the limits what you can do with the medium of the novel. Whereas I think someone like Steinbeck, who also wrote screenplays for some of his own books, when adapted to film, he was thinking very much between mediums versus someone like Faulkner, who is like, what can I do with text on a page? So
then that already answers the question. Like,
okay, there we go.
You know what I mean? Approached his novel wanting to be this avant-garde, I'm purposely writing outside of the context of what a novel should be.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that marries really well to the production we watched of like taking the risk and putting it on stage in a way that's a bit avant-garde and outside of the box or stage of how you would assume to perceive it, you know?
Yeah.
Not justifying that it did that, it executed that perfectly, clearly, by our discussion, but yeah, I'm just trying to find a way to dramaturgically justify the style, and that right there could be a solid point.
Yeah, very possibly.
Very good. Okay. So why don't we head into our next question? And Jill, I'll let you start this one because you seem to have an answer like geared up for it, which is the father Anse?
Anse,
yeah.
Anse justified in putting his family through this dangerous journey to respect Addie's like final death wish to be buried in Jefferson. Jill.
So it's funny how you like accidentally mishapped his name there, Mac, because like I'm gonna use my one swear word of panel and say that Anse or Anus, as Mac just accidentally said, is an ass.
Yes.
He's an ass.
Yes.
Whoa.
I really don't like him.
You're not supposed to like
I know, for sure. Like executed perfectly. But I really don't think he's justified in it. This is a character that I can't get behind. And I think this is where it's like dated again a little bit too. Like and again, dated in saying like this novel was written in the 30s, this production was in 2013. And now we're watching it virtually in 2020. I don't need to see characters like this on stage anymore. Like, I just think for some reason, like, it just didn't pack enough punch. Like, if you are having someone like that on stage, I think you need to make literally more of a statement or more of a contrast. Like, I wasn't understanding, like, I didn't have any, and I think the reason that makes me even despise him more is at the end, with the new lady brought in, I'm like, okay, like, you didn't care. Like, if he actually cared about his wife and actually cared about filling out, like, bringing her wishes forward, everyone's making really grimacy faces, which I don't know why. Am I missing something?
I have a
response differently? Okay. Because I'm like,
you are touching upon a lot of the points I was going to make, so maybe I'll let someone like Mac go first.
Okay, so anyways, it's just like and maybe that's the message we're supposed to get from him, is that he doesn't care, and like, but again, watching it as like a 2020 audience, and like all of the stuff and the struggles that his kids go through, either during the journey or like bring on to the journey with them. You know, there was a moment where I'm like, okay, like we're fulfilling your wife's duties in a very 1930s concept of actually taking a coffin and journeying by wagon to go to another and neighboring city to bury her, which I think is an outdated concept. If you were to take it literally now, I think you can extract it to sort of mean something else. But the way I just like, I don't know. He's not justified. I don't like the character. I think if you want a character like this on stage nowadays, you need to do something radical with it. Otherwise, it doesn't fuel the plot. Yeah. Anyone else want to?
I really want to hear what Mac is saying because he's making the grimaciest of the
Mac's
faces.
face is just really.
Mac.
I don't hide my expressions well. I mean,
God.
that's one of my faults. But I do think he is justified in what he wants to do. I mean, don't get me wrong. He is an asshole. Plain and simple. He is an old asshole that, like, what he does to his daughter with buying the teeth and all that shit. I don't like him for that. I really don't. I don't like it. I don't like some of his actions he makes. But this is his wife, somebody who he clearly did love, and he was wanting to respect your final wishes. Like, having just gone through a lot of this with my grandmother just dying last summer, like, my grandparents were married 63 years. My grandfather would do anything to please her in her dying wishes. Like, there are things you do, and I get it. Like, and it's not like he said it on the dream, like, I want to make this as difficult as freaking possible. I want my son to break his leg. I want us to drown the donkeys. I want us to burn in a barn. Like, that's all shit that happens to him along the way. It's like Grapes of Wrath. Nobody sits out in Grapes of Wrath to sit on the most difficult journey. But that is part of that 1930s Americana perseverance story you're telling. And on top of that, he's a farmer. Like, his wife is gone. He still has a farm he's getting back to with his family. You need another female presence on that farm. Does it make, should he have breathed a little bit longer before he found a new wife? Sure. I mean, we don't know much about her other than, like, he shows up at her house, borrows a shovel, and all of a sudden they're now married. But, like,
Is that
you gotta do what you gotta do. I mean,
is that how marriage works in the South?
like 1930s farm life,
care,
you're
though.
so probably gonna have a leg amputated. Like, you're down a man. You need somebody to help run that
But, like,
farm.
I get what you're saying, Mac, but I feel like and maybe this is the character thing and not even a staging thing, or maybe it is a staging thing, but he doesn't care. Like, the whole journey, all of the struggles that come with this journey, he's either off stage or literally standing off to the side. He doesn't help them through it. And as someone who is so steadfast in wanting to fulfill the love of his life's wishes, you're not going to help put out the fire. You're not going to help fetch her out of the water.
An old man.
That's no excuse. That's zero
He's not like
excuse.
he's not like a young buck of a son who can go like carry the
Like,
coffin.
I'm a type of person. I'm 1,000% the person that I honor people's wishes. I think that's very important. I think that is something that I do personally with my family too. But you have to back that up with an actual caring to do so. It's okay to not care to do so, but if you don't care to do so, I don't think it's right to justify. Like, and I think we see that in the stage of, like, him literally not returning to the hotel, leaving them in disarray to, like, snatch this other lady friend who's not a lady friend, who's literally already married into the family, or at least assumed to be the way he addresses her. And that gesture of, like, come aboard, climb aboard this, like, shit show that I had no hand in doing, and literally took another hand before I released my other hand into the ground. Like, there's no.
I think that comes more down to the portrayal.
Start off but as the journey unfolds, he is not present. I
think that's more of the staging than the actual. I don't know. In the book, is he more active in the book, Ryan?
So no, he's really kind of still off to the side of stuff. But, like, to your point, Mac, about how he's an old man, he does have these 3 adult sons who can do a lot of that. So, like, I don't fault him for not jumping into the river himself. And, like, that's
jumping into the burning barn.
Well, somebody should have helped Jewel because he left that coffin by himself.
Well, where was Daryl?
Well, Daryl started the fire, so he had no interest in
the. Well, the thing, what was his reaction though when his love of his life in a wooden box was in the barn? He was basically like, "Well, someone go get it."
Well, yeah, that should have been the moment that he would risk that because by that point, Cassius already has the broken leg, so he can't do it, and Darl started the fire, so he doesn't have the motive/frame of mind to do it. So I think, that would have been like a redemptive moment if Anse had run into the barn to help Jewel pick up one end. Like,
sure.
In terms of the staging, like Jill, on your point about that was like a very like an ominous like repetition moment of the waving, because like the novel ends on the line like, everybody meet Mrs. Bundren. It just, he introduces that he's chosen a new wife, and then book is over. Like, so the fact that we lingered on that moment even longer, or just letting it sink in.
Watching a white man do that to me in 2020 is a big thing. Like, that's I'm like, okay, great. I'm going to follow you right into the wonderful journey that you have spearheaded for us. Sounds good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In terms of like my answer to this question, if Mac, you were done with yours.
I am done.
Sorry, Mac. I just like kind of
No, I'm enjoying this debate. I mean, like what? Actually, I do want to say one thing, just in response to the 2020 lens we're all going through.
Yes,
I do think yes, we do.
We will get to that. Yeah, but
not in that respect, but just the way Jill's like 2020 lensing this character and viewing him in 2020. We also have to remember we're adapting a character from the 1930s. So yes, we have our 2020 goggles on.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we have to respect that a character from 1930 is not going to act the same way we do in 1920.
Yeah.
The way and I don't like the idea of everybody now being like washing characters to fit the 2020 goggles, when it's like characters from all different times and periods have their way of thinking, and if we all go with this modern hoopla route, then like we're going to lose part of the history that makes Anse the reason why the way he is, and why we have moved away from him. Hopefully there's less of these Anses in the world, but you can't have that unless you examine him in the past.
I agree with Mac.
So you need to have him be the asshole and unlikable person of the story, because
we can think he's more of an asshole now than even we would have in the 30s, because he is a product of his time, and we hopefully as a society, but who knows. But even like the book does not frame him in a positive light, so even in the 30s he is viewed as this like asshole.
Well, he's a cheap guy who didn't even bother to call ahead to have a hole dug for his wife.
That's there you go.
Like, that's a bit of an asshole move. Like, that is a bit of an asshole move, but I do get why he wants to take the body. I do get that. I don't think I don't know in the book, Ryan, does he have the wife, the new Mrs. Bunce, already like set up? Like, do we get any news?
No, he asks her to he borrows a spade from her, and then the next we hear from her, they're engaged or married. I don't know how the legal system worked in this time, but like,
so it wasn't like she was already off on the side.
The fact that the pharmacist insists that Dewey Dell needs to get a marriage license with her $10 instead of abortion concoction, chances are, they're not married yet. At the end, there is a court procedure that needs to go through. But anyway, side tangent on that. So my answer to this question is kind of a bit of a both, Jill and Mac, because I agree with Mac in the sense that I understand wanting to respect these wishes, especially when you're in grief. And, I understand the kind of symbolism of granting this last wish. And for someone like Anse, I can kind of rationalize him rationalizing it as this is the one good thing I will do with my life. Which, like, whether or not he's thinking of it in those terms, I think, like, subtextually, that, like, I'm a bad husband, a bad father, bad farmer, overall bad person. I appeal to Christianity to get people to do what I want them to do for me, but I'm not a good Christian myself. So I can kind of understand that the least I can do is get Addie into the ground in the way she wants, and speaking from a theater history perspective, and Faulkner loved his classical Greeks. I think of this as like a bit of an Antigone kind of bad things will come if you do not respect the burial rites. That said, bad things come precisely because of the respecting of these burial rites. And I agree with you, Mac, that he couldn't have predicted everything bad that would happen on this journey, but he's given multiple outs, ways out throughout the journey. Every stranger he meets says, "Oh, it's going to take you a long time. Oh no, the river's flooded. Oh no, your mules are drowning. Like, you're not going to make it. Just here, we got perfectly good land right here. You could just bury her right here." And so, when tallying up this kind of like material cost that this journey costs really everyone but him, like, if he did really care for his family, he would have I think, taken, he would recognize that the well-being of the living should be prioritized over the wishes of the dead.
Just to talk really quickly about that, Ryan, because that was on my mind too. Like, I think that's just like an important, like, even concept to deal with grief too. Like, it is incredibly difficult to sort of like survive in a fog once those have passed. And like me personally, like losing my grandparents and just knowing a couple family friends who have like lost children, it's very difficult to like come back down to earth, for lack of a better phrase, and really focus and be present with those around you. And I think that is one thing to just, I guess, in a way that this character paves nicely, the idea that there is a lot of like perseveration on the dead that I think a lot of people deal with, that like they forget to be present and like be there for those that are living. And I think we see through the siblings, through his kids, there's a lot of turmoil, either mentally, biologically, physically, that are placed upon them that he just doesn't see. And again, like, I guess to kind of just maybe lighten up a little bit on my depiction of Anse, like from a character point of view, he does a good job of being that person that kind of has everyone else turned off, and he's still really thinking about the dead, like Ryan was saying.
Grief will make you do crazy things.
Yeah. So this is kind of the part.
Drowning in a river.
Yeah. So this is kind of the part of my answer to this where I in the end agree more with Jill, that if the question was just, and I wrote the question kind of deliberately in this way, but if the question was just, is this journey justified to have Addie's wishes granted? I would say maybe yes, but because the question is Anse justified in putting his family through this journey, I don't think Anse is thoughtful enough about what he's doing and why to earn the benefit of the doubt of what we've been discussing about the good reasons to do it. Like, he does not care about Cash's leg. He doesn't care about Darl's sanity. He doesn't care about Jules' horse. He steals Dewey Dell's money. And the second that Addie's in the ground, light switch brain, I've done my duty and now I can get hitched with someone else. He is just not thinking symbolically enough about what he's doing for me to think that those symbolic reasons can be valid justifications for him. And if this was like a simple 2-day journey where nothing went wrong, we could be like, well, what was the harm of it? But after everything that happens and the fact that he is given many opportunities to back out, to kind of compare him to another character from a great American novel, he's Ahab. He is so tunnel vision. I am going to do this thing that I want to do. This isn't killing something. This is respecting the dead, which is a little different. But yeah, he will not turn back. And it is that stubbornness that is his folly.
Anse doesn't like his kids very much. Like, I think the only person he actually ever cared for in that family was Addie. That was it. Yeah. Like, I think that's why he really doesn't care about his son breaking his leg or selling the horse or like his daughter or like his son Sandy, because he's like, never cared about him to begin with. Like, I got my one girl, and like once she's out of the way, like in the ground, it's like, okay, next. Like, I totally get it. Like, it's like he's a very tunnel focused character, which once again creates a lot of problems for everybody else around him. But once again, I can see why. Ed!
So, when I first watched this, I had very little understanding of what was happening. So, I didn't know where they were going, why they were heading there. I just knew that somebody was dying and that they were moving. Or someone was dead and they were moving. That's while I was watching it, okay? But now that I understand what's happening, I agree with Jill and Mac and Ryan. I have my own little take on it as well. You guys bring up very good points, especially for what Jill said about the contrast of the character. And I guess this plays more towards the staging of it than maybe the book. But the contrast of the character not being a big enough contrast. I agree. Even if I had known that he was taking the body from wherever they were to Jefferson, I was impartial to his character. I was impartial to the other characters. Like, I didn't understand what was happening. Of course, like the meta reasons as to why that is, but I had no real concerns for their well-beings or anything like that. I just was watching it and I thought, okay, he's going over there. So I agree that there wasn't a strong contrast with his character. If we're looking at it from the story, I think psychologically, and if I was in that situation, hell no, you're not justified taking me on this journey. I mean, if I was putting myself in their shoes, if I were to put myself in their shoes, it's like, you're not taking me on this 9-day journey, or what I guess was supposed to be less than 9 days, to go bury a body that's rotting in its casket. It's like, no way. But if we are looking at it artistically, as I think, that's the purpose. What kind of statement does that make? This person who doesn't care but honors his wife's wishes. And I really like what Ryan said about respecting rituals, but then the consequences of rituals. So if that was an angle they were going for, or if that's an angle that the book was going for, then I think, wow, that is interesting. And I don't think this needs to be a likable character for him to teach or enlighten the audience about something. And I agree with Mac where I think just because this character is an as through and through, and his actions are very deplorable, doesn't mean that he shouldn't be staged, that this type of person shouldn't be staged. I just think if there was but I agree with Jill. I think if there was a stronger contrast, it would justify the staging way more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's my answer to that.
Very good. Nice amalgamation, Ed. Nice cherry picking of the best lines for all of us.
Shout out.
All right. Let's head into the final question of the night, or day, afternoon, whatever. But we're heading into the final question, which is, what might this story have to say to us experiencing it in the 21st century? Be that live in 2013 when this was originally performed, or online viewing in 2020. Ryan, I see you smirking, so I think you should go first.
I'm smirking because I know that my answer for this one is kind of boring, and I kind of hope other people bring more interesting answers to this. But I'll go first if you want. Sure. Yeah, set the bar low. To me, yeah, this goes back to the question Jill brought up earlier for why this book, you were framing it, Jill, specifically in the why, you have this Lecoq company, why pick this book to frame it? But I think it's just kind of just a general question of adaptation dramaturgy in general, of why this source, why do it as theater, why do it now? Those are the big kind of three questions. And there isn't always a good answer to that, because sometimes an artistic director decided and paid a playwright to write it, and we don't have time to be thoughtful about it. They thought it would sell tickets because it's a recognizable name. But I think I'm struggling to see parallels with this story, the 30s and the today. I'm sure they exist, and I'd love to hear some of you bring them up. But I don't fault it for me not grasping those. Well, one, because that's just on me, and if you all have better reasons for Anse's Trump or whatever, I guess it does. But in 2013, we were just first year into the second Obama administration, so think about this as maybe we can connect Trump stuff to it today, but think about the arc of how we got here. But what I kind of want to say, just again, in its favor, because it's no secret that I'm very positive on this production, is you almost don't need that specific why this source, why now question with this, when you have a very good answer, I think, for the why theater. And that is to do this beautiful visual imagery that it could have been this book, it could have been another book, but the book gives us that entranceway into doing that. And when I left the theater in 2014, I wasn't thinking, yes, Faulkner is still relevant because Obama or whatever. What stuck with me are those images, and it's just this experience of the pure theater of it. And these appeals to the imagination, that's what lingers, that's what touched me, and that's what I enjoy so much revisiting now, all these years later. So, again, excited to hear if other people have good, interesting answers for how this is like #relevant today. But I kind of think it's okay if it's not.
Ed.
So I agree with Ryan to a certain extent. I do find it a bit difficult to try and draw a parallel. Not that you can't draw a parallel, but I think the parallel shouldn't be something political. I think even in the writing of the story, that connecting politics to it will be more of an imposition of ideas as opposed to something cohesive with the play itself. Not that the play is absent of any political problems, that it's completely absent of it, but that's not that wouldn't be the heart of their stories, of their pieces, of their journey. I feel you could go a route where, all right, there is definitely a power struggle. All of them are of sound, well, except for Darl, sound mind and body. But they each have their own autonomy, but they choose to stay and listen to their father, which is, I mean, despite the resistance, they go along with whatever he says, and Anus is the most Anse.
Subconsciously.
Oh my god. Anse is the most unchanging character out of all of them, and I think that contributes to the problem of his character. So it kind of makes me wonder, was Anse the focal point, or definitely this force, maybe not the focal point, but definitely this force to really learn from. What it could be is that power, which can be translated to any society, any point in time, is like the power a family head holds, or what one is willing to do for the dead, or the impressionable minds of children, or the, I guess, master slave, whatever. I think you can go those routes. I do find it hard to draw a parallel to today. I think you could probably draw something more towards a universal sort of timeless place for, I guess, human existence, within human existence, but something as specific as today, I'm not sure.
Jill?
So to piggyback right off that, and I think, because I hear what you're saying, Ed, of that it doesn't necessarily need to be political or should be political, but I think something that's really important to remember right now, being being theater makers, theater artists who literally cannot do our craft. And I think maybe this is just a personal preference or a personal sort of like foreshadowing, but I think a lot of people agree with this too, is that when we are able to kind of go back on stages and we are able to like display texts, I think just inevitably like art is going to be more political because of the state of the way that the world is in, the leaders that we are dealing with, the socio-psychological concepts that we're dealing with. So I think like I did have on the 2020 goggles a lot through talking of this, and I think a lot of it is coming from just like frustration and coming. It's interesting. It's interesting watching that this piece was from 2013. A lot of the Shakespeare stuff we reviewed was also from around that time period too. And I had the same sort of frustration. And it's a frustration out of like, it's not, I guess it's a frustration, but a realization of how different putting up pieces really was from like 6 years ago. Like, and thinking of it that way, right? And it's like, not everything I go to see now is politically driven, but there's some sort of tone or some sort of like message that can be taken from that, and that might not be like implicated to be so. Maybe that's just like my own brain extracting and thinking that art is more political now. But there's certain concepts that are just implemented. Like I said, I even saw this in like our 2012, 2013, 2014 Shakespeare productions we had to review. There's certain things that are integrated in those productions that like kind of just made it like a crisp package and here you go. But there's like moments where I'm looking back and it's like, how is that not a thing? Like how is that not augmented? Because for me, I want to see this again, but it needs to be almost like the farce of it, or like the breaking down of the fourth wall that these characters do. Breaking the fourth wall in 2020 is vastly different from breaking the fourth wall in 2013. Like there's a different thing that comes with it, and it may not be political. It might just be like a more of a thing to do, or a concept that's not really avant-garde because it's been done for like X amount of years, and it's been layered in through other productions. It's fascinating to think that only like 6-7 years ago, the craft of like the example I just used of breaking the fourth wall is so different if you were to see a production now than 2013. Quite possibly because maybe it's more politically implemented. But I even just think the structure of attacking or placing a piece on stage is different. And I don't know why necessarily. Like, it's only been 6-7 years. Now, mind you, like the only thing I can say is because I think there has been more use of art for political sake, that like maybe there is that bleed of that double watching of like, oh, I'm watching this character break the fourth wall in that speech, but like they're actually politically, socially saying this as well. That's the only really like reason why. It's funny that I've gleaned that from like these 2013, 2014, 2012 productions that we reviewed as seeing like, this is a package that exists in this year. And then I'm like, well, why? Like, why did we do Faulkner's As I Lay Dying in 2013? Is it just because it's an example of like, you know, Anse being this like head of the household, possible like, what does that do? You know, them sort of being subservient to him. What does that do? But like, I don't really see like we're talking, like I can see this in 2020 in being like Anse is a Trump-esque character, in being like the siblings and the kids are a diverse troupe of actors, like either that be racially and or gender bending too. Like I can see that like being done, whereas like I don't see like an all-white cast with like the concept of being like head of the household. Like why is that on our stage? Like why is that? I guess it's just like it's a show to watch. It's something to like get that like that story. But I'm like, why are we? When I think it's, I don't know. I'm going on like a rant now of what theater's gonna look like. But I just, if this production with the same troupe and like same sort of vibe was put on our stage next year, I wouldn't go see it, because that's not the stories that I want to see on stage. Like I think especially post-pandemic, as like theater makers, like we have a duty of taking these texts and taking these old texts. Absolutely, I don't think we should eradicate like anything, and I say this in our Shakespeare chats too, but like there has to, and it's unfortunate because as artists, like we want to just do art for art's sake sometimes. But I think now, like our audience and like the world at large, they don't think our career exists enough to like come back, to be honest. Like a lot of people outside of the theater world are thinking like, well, what's your next career choice? Because theater's no longer a thing. But I think in order to like, unfortunately, we're going to have to pack a bigger punch of like, well, theater is a thing. And look at this text that we've just discussed, like works so much better as staged versus movie. So shut off your streaming systems, shut down your computers. So already we're proving that this deserves to be on stage, but we are going to have to pack an extra punch too of like why this particular story, you know, adapted by a white man needs to be on the stage now. Like, and again, being theater makers and artists, it's unfortunate that we are going to have to like it's unfortunate, but fortunate in the same vein of like taking, I guess I'm saying unfortunate in a sense of like proving to people outside of the arts industry that we exist. That's the unfortunate part of it. The fortunate part, though, I think, is that showing that not only do we exist, but we know how to maneuver and take these texts and make them relevant to and universal to every single person, regardless of status, of race, of gender.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Sorry,
And
I'm going on like a really long.
No. I see what
I'm
you're
trying
saying.
to like.
And stop
Yeah.
me if I misquote you or anything like that. But let's say that we do take this piece and put it in, and we put it on for the times, for 2020, and that we want it to be relevant, and that we find that something like the example that you gave, where Ains is Trump and his children are the oppressed under Trump regime. It wouldn't be universal because Trump supporters wouldn't want to go see it. And that's why I think having something a bit more universal, like, hey, this is a tyrannical figure. These are oppressors, right? Having that more open, I guess, symbolic ideology put on the stage would be more open to people who are seeing theater as this, I guess, craft that shouldn't come back.
Right.
It would invite more people who are wanting, oh, I want to see, I want to learn about this, or I want to see this production because they do a really good job of having this power struggle, as opposed to having this imposed political, like, like the only people who are going to go see it are the people who think alike.
Support that. Yeah.
Who support that, right? And so if you want to, yeah, exactly. So if you want to, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
But I do wholeheartedly believe that for a piece like this, if a political statement, especially a 2020 political statement, was needed to be made, I don't think everybody would want to go see that. And I think the goal of theater is to always have everybody want to come and see that, whether they support people that we don't support or not. So that's my take on that's my thought process towards like having some political driving forces.
No, I agree with that too, because I think it is very important to like neglect, for example, you're using like Trump supporters, like absolutely, like you'd want to build them into, so yeah, like maybe conceptually wise, keep it more like tyrants and oppressors versus like literally throwing a toupee on Ains's character.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's blunt, but hello. But I do think though that like this production could dabble with more diversity across the stage.
I think you could even take this play just from my initial watching of it. I think you could just take this play and cast everyone as black.
That's what I'm saying. There's no wherewithal. They don't have to be white.
It really doesn't have to be white. You can make the whole family like Asian, black, whatever. There's no race that's particular to the family. Yeah.
So I think it'd be a really interesting piece to see in 2020. I feel like that would be for it to be entirely black. I feel like that would be what would happen most likely. Words.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say tackling this question, I came at it from a thematic perspective versus like a political perspective. So, I mean, for me, like in a 2013 lens, the reason why I think you would want to do this story is, like, speaking historically at that time, we were coming out of the Great Recession. We were rebuilding from that 2008 downturn. And just like the Greats of Wrath, once again, it's these epic stories of perseverance and endurance through the toughest of shit that you got to get through. That's what these two stories are. So for me, I'm like, you could easily stage this in 2013 as like a story of this family setting out on the road, and they get a lot of shit thrown at them. Whether it's by Ains's hands or not, like that's an entirely different thing. But it's that thing of this family's persevering journey to get to point B. And I think in 2013, that was a message we all were really looking for. Like, around the same time, Stratford did Grapes of Wrath. Like, it's that thing of perseverance, endurance to get to the next point and like survive. Like, I think, do they all come out happily in the end? No, but a lot of people came out of that recession. They survived it, but they weren't happy. A lot of them had lost their homes, lost their jobs, and were having to rebuild. This family's lost their matriarch. One guy's off in the insane asylum. Other guy's probably gonna have his leg amputated. Like, we all come out with battle scars. But like, for me, like, it was that story of endurance versus anything else. That Americana, go get him.
I have to disagree with that, Mac, actually,
Ooh.
because if it ended on a hopeful note, I would agree with you.
Grapes of Wrath isn't on a hopeful note.
Grapes of Wrath, I didn't see the Stratford production, but the book ends on one of the most bizarre, hopeful notes in all of world literature, probably. Well, I don't want to spoil, also change our rating on this video by describing it, but those who've read the book know what I'm talking about. I don't know what the Stratford production did. I'm sorry, I didn't see it, but
it ends with Rosa Sharon breastfeeding a man.
Okay, yes, I didn't know if we were allowed to say that aloud, but yeah,
it's a thing. It's not. But
that is the hopeful note of take this. You know, these people who have been devastated.
I thought more it's just like endurance. Like, family is just trying to survive the flood at the end.
Well, it's the family. It's the coming back together as a family is what that moment, at least in the book, kind of symbolizes, is that turning mother-child dynamic kind of on its head and finding these ties as a kind of gesture towards collective unity and how we'll, working together, make our way to the other side. As I Lay Dying doesn't end with that kind of note. It ends with Anse obliviously happy that he's done his job and can now move on with his life, and the rest of his family suffering the scars of it. If we want to talk 2013 politics, and speaking of the recession...
I wasn't going for politics. I was going for thematic endurance.
But since you mentioned 2013 and like the recession
was, yes, absolutely, like it's there, like we were rebuilding from that moment in history.
Maybe Anse's Bush in that 2013 moment, he's done his job, he's out of there, he's happy with what he's done, and everyone else kind of just has to deal with it, and it doesn't look so hopeful for them in that moment.
Well, I mean, look at where we are. I mean, getting out of the recession, we did a lot of things that we probably shouldn't have, like refilling the banks, like not doing it the right way, but we persevered.
Yeah,
we got to the other side, regrew the economy.
Something about As I Lay Dying, both on page and stage and screen, does not come with that hopeful note to me. It really,
I don't think perseverance is a hopeful note. I think it's really like survive, get to the other side, and move forward.
Okay, see, I think the language of perseverance implies hope more so than survival implies just
maybe endurance then.
Endurance.
Endurance.
Yeah.
This is a story of endurance.
Yeah, I would say
I could see into 2013.
I would argue this is a story of failed perseverance, that wanting to persevere at great cost, and everyone except for Anse comes out worse than they were when they started.
It's definitely a story where you're learning on along the journey as opposed to learning from the end.
Yes.
Yeah. Which is why I prefer the title As I Lay Dying to take me back to Jefferson, because that implies the destination kind of as like the goal, when it's literally the laying dying, which is not something that just Addie does. They are all dying through this journey.
And then I will say, I'll plow through quickly because I know, Ed, you gotta get going at 3. But I will say, for 2020 lens, I viewed it as a very humbling story, where it's like, you think your life is shit, being stuck inside and having to wear a mask when you go out for a walk. Try living through what these people had to live through. Broken leg, living with a corpse, like all this, like dad's an asshole, all this. Hey, listen, we're already past the I'm going for it. But like, yeah, like it was a very humbling kind of thing where it's like, oh yeah, I thought my life was rough. Watch what they have to go and deal with. Like, and then also, I think also, like, especially in 2020, just watching once again the world that we're living in right now, that is very political. We are seeing a lot of clashes going on between people. Like I saw this very much as like an almost intergenerational struggle, where the young ones are trying to break away and forge their path, but you have older generation that still holds the power. Like watching these last 2 weeks of the 2 different conventions, it will like a lot of times it was the younger generation being hope and optimism, unity, like let's move forward, a little bit more to the left, liberal. You have the older generation, a little bit more conservative, a little bit more to the right, and it's this smashing of loggerheads with these fathers and sons. So those are the 2 things: humbling, that thank God I'm having to live through what they're living through, and intergenerational struggle. Those are my 2.
Yep. Those are both valid.
From 2020.
Yeah,
and
sure.
endurance from 2013. Not perseverance, endurance.
Sure.
Nice.
Ryan, or no, you already went. Jill, you went. Oh, wow, we're done.
We did it.
Thank you all so much for tuning in for our post-Stratford first review. We have a lot more going forward. I can announce now we'll be using the platform Broadway HD to get our materials. So if you do want to follow along and watch the productions we will be talking about, go for Broadway HD. It's like $12 a month Canadian, $8 a month American for any of our American friends who are watching. It's a really great channel. I know Ryan's like playing the next 6 months of our reviews because he's like gone through the entire catalog and found some good
I'm
ones.
enjoying having it. Yeah.
Yes. So definitely check out Broadway
Hashtag not
HD.
sponsored.
Yeah, I was about to say we're not sponsored.
But I mean, Broadway HD, if you do want to sponsor us, we want to post.
We are here.
Because we will be using your platform. But yes, Broadway HD is where we'll be turning next for our review material. We have more coming up in the very near future. But in the meantime, Jill, where can they find you?
Yes, you can find me at my artist Instagram account at jillian.robinson96. You'll see some upcoming projects, some singing clips, all that fun stuff.
Great.
Yep.
Ed?
You can find me on Instagram at Edmund_Clark_official. Come and see what else I've been doing. Right now I have a few things in the works, so I'll be posting more soon, but yeah.
Wonderful. Ryan, give us your classic sign-off.
Yeah, sorry, I'm not a social media guy. You can't find me there. I'd much rather you send that love to Cup of Hemlock, since on the one social media I do actually use, I mostly just share Cup of Hemlock stuff anyway. If you want, you can follow Sad Ibsen Theater on all socials, but all of those accounts are functionally dead, much like the company that they represent.
Ryan, you're so self-deprecating.
Oh my god.
Someone has to
be. But yeah, you can find me on all social media platforms at Mackenzie Horner. You can look for my podcast, Before the Downbeat. We just released our episode all about Sweeney Todd. So lots of fun there. Stay tuned September 9th for The Man of Destiny, featuring Ed as Napoleon, myself as Lieutenant, and Jill being our wonderful stage manager. And Ryan is the one who created the script for us.
Well, Shaw created it. I just dramaturged it. But yes.
Ryan worked with Shaw.
Yes. my good friend Shaw and I sat down and I'm like, okay, listen, George. Does this need to be about Napoleon?
Exactly. So yeah, we all played a part in this upcoming published reading. Stay tuned for that. End of mid-September, we have our first roundtable discussion coming out about Shakespeare and gender that Jill will be hosting. I will be a panelist on as well, along with many other great people and voices will be heard as well. And then, yeah, stay tuned for more. We have more polished readings in the works. Same with more reviews. So lots more coming your way in the very near future. In the meantime, everybody, thank you. Have a great day. And let's go off and bury a corpse.
Yep.
Bye.
Cheers.